Hey everybody, this is Billy for NinjaPirateZombieRobot. Come join me as we exercise our inner geek nerds. In this video, we'll answer a question that gets asked again every so often, especially in the crypto mining subreddits. Is it worth lottery mining Bitcoin as a small-scale home miner? How much does it cost? And how does it compare to an actual lottery? Let's do some definitive research and math it out once and for all. Let's start with the basics so that we're all on the same page. In this video, we'll be talking only about Bitcoin mining, and specifically about small-scale Bitcoin lottery mining, such as at a home or hobbyist level. You can pool mine BTC, of course, which is combining your computing power with others for a more regular income, but these days you can expect only about 4 cents per terahash per day after electricity costs. Different public pools will have different payouts and different fees, but that's a common rough estimate. At that rate, a simple home mining rig like a BitAxe Gamma at 1.2 terahashes per second, or 1.2 trillion hashes per second, would need to run for about 6.85 years before it pays for itself. Not great. For this reason, a lot of people will instead try lottery mining. This is when a solo miner tries to find a valid Bitcoin block entirely on their own, instead of sharing their hashing power with a pool. It's called lottery mining because the odds of finding a block on your own are astronomically low, just like winning the lottery, but the payout can be big if you do. As of the making of this video in October 2025, the reward would be 3.125 BTC plus fees. A good rounded estimate at current BTC exchange rates for a total payout converted into US dollars would be about $350,000. And the current Bitcoin mining difficulty target as of the making of this video is 146.72 trillion, so we'll use this value for our calculations. To make this video as useful as possible to a range of home and hobbyist miners, we'll take a couple of popular setups into account. We'll look at a BitAxe Gamma running at a common default hash rate of 1.2 terahash per second and drawing 20 watts of power, which currently sells for around 120 US dollars. We'll also consider an Avalon Nano 3S running at 6.0 terahash per second and drawing 120 watts of power, less power efficient than the BitAxe, but also a lower upfront cost per hash rate at 350 US dollars. And just to compare, we'll also include a popular industrial mining rig, a Bitmain Antminer S21 sporting a hash rate of 200 terahash per second with a power draw of 3,500 watts, which you can buy for a good $1,800 USD. The Antminer uses the same ASIC as the BitAxe, only it has a crap ton more of them, so that means that its power efficiency is similar. But the upfront cost per terahash rate is far lower. If you can afford it, you will obviously also be using up electricity much more quickly while you run it. We'll also consider power costs in 3 tiers: cheap, medium, and expensive. The cheap tier will show us what the stats look like when power cost is about as low as it gets in the US, which is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. For our medium rate, we'll use 18 cents per kilowatt hour, which is close to the national average. And for our expensive rate, well, electricity at my home is actually some of the highest in the US at 30 cents per kilowatt hour on the average, which totally sucks, but we'll use it. To compare lottery mining with actual lotteries, we'll take a look at a few of the most popular. First of all is the Powerball lottery, which is available in 45 out of the 50 states here in the US at a ticket cost of $2. It's a typical number-drawing lottery game where you pick 5 numbers in a range plus 1 special number. But the exact mechanics aren't important for our math, only the prize values and the odds of winning each one. Since the Powerball uses a progressive jackpot, meaning it grows until somebody wins it, then we'll have to pick a reasonable average jackpot value. We'll use a jackpot of $100 million, which the Powerball reaches fairly often. Here are the different Powerball prize levels and the chances of winning each one. Another lottery we'll compare is called the Fantasy 5. This is another straightforward number-drawing lottery game available here in California, just at a much smaller scale and with a ticket cost of $1. It also has a progressive jackpot, and we'll use a reasonable average jackpot of $100,000, plus some estimated smaller values for its lesser variable prizes. As you can imagine, The odds of winning the Fantasy 5 jackpot are far better than winning the Powerball. And finally, we'll also compare to a popular scratcher-type lottery with a much smaller prize pool. We'll use the California Lottery's Beginner's Luck game, one of the more simple examples. Its top prize is $5,000, with several tiers of fixed prizes. Again, we don't need to know its exact mechanics, only the available prize values and approximate odds. To compare these to Bitcoin lottery mining, the value we're interested in is the expected payout, or EP, which is simply the prize value divided by the odds. So for example, if a prize was $25,000 but you had only a 1 in a million chance of winning it, then the expected payout would be 2.5 cents. This means that if you bought a whole crap ton of tickets over time, then on the average you should gain about 2.5 pennies of winnings for every ticket that you bought. If you've done other lottery-related math, then you've probably encountered another formula, the expected value, or EV. This is just the expected payout minus the cost per ticket. The EV is useful for comparing different lotteries, but we won't need to use it for this video. Because we want to take into account all expenses, including equipment and electricity costs, we'll be comparing lottery mining versus lottery draws on a cost basis. That means, what is our expected payout after we have spent X amount of dollars in equipment and electricity versus spending that many dollars in lottery tickets? But because lottery mining takes time, we'll also take into consideration how much time you will have spent mining by the time your cost has reached that amount, assuming that you are mining continuously around the clock, 24/7. We will also ignore extra financial considerations like taxes on your winnings or earnings, and treat all payments as if they were simple lump sums. So we'll look at earnings before taxes just to keep things simple. Just keep in mind that capital gains taxes from Bitcoin are usually less than total lottery taxes, which are income taxes. The difference is especially clear if you're talking about long-term capital gains, and especially if you get your lottery payments in a single lump sum. But again, we won't worry about all that in this video. Okay, let's start talking some real math here. We mentioned earlier that the current Bitcoin mining difficulty is 146.72 trillion. But what exactly does that mean? We don't go too deep into the weeds here, and let me know if you'd like a separate video explaining more technical details about things like cryptographic hashes and nonces and the values passed between Bitcoin nodes and Stratum servers and miners. But for this video, you just need to understand that to mine a Bitcoin block, we need to calculate a value called a hash made from Bitcoin transaction data combined with some numbers that the miner can choose itself, and that hash has to be less than or equal to a target value. And that target value scales by the difficulty value we just mentioned. In short, the higher this difficulty value, then the smaller the target value and the lower the chances of us finding a hash that is even smaller than the target. The most important point is that there is no way to find out the final hash based upon the block data or the extra value that the miner added. The miner just has to try a value, see if it works, and if it doesn't, then it tries another value over and over again. This calculation takes time, and so the faster the miner runs, the more attempts it can make, and the greater the chances over time that it just might find a hash small enough, and thus wins that sweet prize of 3.125 BTC plus fees, which again, we will just round to about 350,000 USD. So clearly, the more hashes we can try, then the more chances we have of finding a good value, similar to being able to buy more lottery tickets to try winning the jackpot. For Bitcoin mining, though, we calculate hashes very, very fast. Every terahash per second is literally 1 trillion hashes calculated per second. It sounds like a lot, and it is, but how does it compare to that 146.72 trillion difficulty? Well, not so good actually, because the hashes we are computing are 256-bit hashes. The math is actually pretty simple, but we can see that a BitAxe gamma at 1.2 terahash per second will find a block, on the average, once every 525 trillion seconds, which is about once every 16,640 years. You can see why it is considered similar to winning the lottery. As a side note, despite our humble little BitAxe gamma needing about 16,640 years to find a block, around the globe, someone somewhere finds a Bitcoin block about every 10 minutes. That difficulty value is actually adjusted every couple of weeks to ensure that it takes miners on the average about 10 minutes to mine each new block. That should give you an idea about how massive the global mining hash rate truly is, at least compared to a single little BitAxe gamma. In other words, your BitAxe is contributing about 1 in 875 million of the total global hash power. So yeah, don't hold your breath. So let's take a look at our mining costs and odds over some specific time frames. We'll look at 30 days, 90 days, 365 days, and 1,100 days, which is just about 3 years. First, let's take a look at the BitAxe Gamma. You'll see that after a month, our costs are about the same. We haven't been running very long, so most of our expenses were the cost of the rig itself. But as time goes on, more and more of our cost goes into electricity, and at about 3 years, we've spent quite a bit more for expensive electricity than we did for cheap electricity. But we've also spent all that time churning out hashes at the rate of 1.2 terahash per second, or 1.2 trillion hashes every second. After 30 days, we have only about a 1 in 202,597 chance of mining a block. But after mining for about 3 years, in that time we have about a 1 in 5,525 chance of mining a block. Still poor odds, but that's offset by the fact that if we did mine a block, we'd have spent anywhere from $172 to $278 to gain $350,000. But that's only if we get lucky. On the average, though, our expected payout over that time is just $63.34. In other words, we are far more likely to have lost $278 than to have gained $350,000. Well, that's a lottery for you. So how does the Avalon Nano 3S compare? Better, but it's still a lottery, as you'd expect. Once again, at just a month, most of our cost is in the unit itself. But over 3 years, the electricity costs add up. However, we are also crunching hashes at 5 times the hash rate of the BitAxe Gamma, so to nobody's surprise, the odds are exactly 5 times better. But our expected payout even after 3 years is still far below our total costs. Even with cheap electricity, we expect to make less than half of our money back. Now, I know that most people probably won't be running an industrial rig like an Antminer S21 out of their homes. But if you did, or if you were just curious, then here are the numbers for it. You have a very high upfront cost, of course, but compared to the raw hashing power of the unit, it is actually very economic. And even over 3 years, you still have only a 1 in 33 chance of mining a block, after a crazy $11,000 to almost $30,000 in total expenses. Make no mistake, these are not good odds. You have about a 97% chance of not getting a single penny after spending up to $30,000. And take a look at the expected payout, $10,557. What does this tell you? It means that we are almost but not quite at a break-even point, but only if our electricity were very cheap. This actually surprised me as I was doing this research, because it means that the Antminer S21 is reaching a point where it is no longer profitable. So these days, you will need newer, even more efficient mining rigs than the S21 to run a profitable business mining Bitcoin. Or you need super cheap or renewable energy. Side note, it is now estimated that over 50% of all energy used for Bitcoin mining worldwide uses renewable energy sources or makes use of otherwise wasted energy. With such thin profit margins, this shouldn't be a surprise. Let me know if you'd like to see a separate video dedicated to it. All right, now that we've seen how Bitcoin mining behaves like a slow-motion lottery, let's see how that stacks up against real lotteries that pay almost immediately in cash. Because they all have multiple prize tiers, we have to calculate the expected payout for each tier. It's simple though, just the odds times the prize value. The total expected payout for the entire game would just be all of these EPs added together. Here is what it looks like for the Powerball, if the jackpot prize were at 100 million US dollars. We calculate that the total expected payout is about 66 cents, meaning that if we purchased enough tickets, then we should win about 66 cents of prizes for every ticket purchased. Considering that each ticket costs $2, you can see why playing the lottery is not a solid income strategy. But nobody plays the lottery for steady income. They play it on the chances of a jackpot. The Fantasy 5 shows a similar story, just at a smaller scale. With our jackpot prize at an estimated 100,000 US dollars, we have an expected payout of about 46 cents, which is less than the $1 cost of a ticket. It's interesting to note, though, that because the difference between the expected payout and the ticket cost, which as a reminder is known as the expected value, is smaller, that means that the Fantasy 5 game is more cost-effective than the Powerball. But it's still an overall loss, so don't use it as a source of income. And then we come to our little scratcher that could, beginner's luck. As before, the expected payout is 66 cents, which is less than the $1 ticket cost. But the difference, or expected value, is even smaller, making this scratcher a better bang for your buck than either of the two draw games. The most you can ever win from each ticket is just $5,000 USD. But as you spend more and more to play the game, you will on the average end up with more winnings in the end, unless of course you get incredibly lucky. So how do we use these numbers to compare Bitcoin lottery mining versus the actual lottery? Simple. We just compare the expected values against a set amount of expenses over the time frames involved. And so that we don't spend way too much time on it, we'll just look at the value at the 1,100-day mark, or about 3 years, for each of the mining rigs. In short, we're asking, we paid this much over 3 years to mine Bitcoin, and this is on average how much we'd get. But what if we instead spend all of that money to buy tickets in this lottery game? Okay, let's do this. For the BitAxe Gamma over 3 years, our expected payout was only $63.34, though we paid anywhere from $172 to $278 for the rig and electricity. Had we used that money for lottery tickets, here are our expected payouts, or average total winnings. Surprised? Almost everything across the board would have been better in the lottery. Cheap electricity costs being diverted into Powerball draws would have been close to the same, $63 versus $57. But if we had high electricity costs, then our best bet would have been to take all $278 and buy beginner's luck scratchers for a 2.8 times greater average payout, from $63 to $182. How did the Avalon Nano 3S do? Well, now the results start to become mixed. Our 3-year EP of $316 is more than 40% better than spending the money on the Powerball if our electricity costs are low, but with high electricity costs, the Powerball gives the better average expected payout. However, that little beginner's luck scratcher is 38% better with cheap electricity and a whopping 170% better under expensive electricity rates. And just for completeness' sake, how did our industrial Antminer S21 do? Well, we already figured out that it could get close to but not quite profitable in the long term with cheap enough electricity, so it should be no surprise that it outperformed all non-profitable lottery games. But once electricity became expensive, then the Powerball almost ties it, and our little beginner's luck scratcher totally wipes the floor with it as far as value. If anything, this really showcases how high electricity costs will easily wipe out mining profits. It is important to keep in mind that almost everything we saw here was at lottery levels of luck. Even the industrial-level Antminer we found is not even profitable anymore, and you would have to upgrade to newer, more efficient models and ideally scale up to dozens or even hundreds of rigs to run a good, profitable business. Even if you used it as a super awesome lottery miner, that Antminer would still have only about a 3% chance every 3 years to mine a single Bitcoin block at the current difficulty, and that difficulty value trends upward in the long term. That means you would risk having to wait many decades before you mined your first Bitcoin block, all while spending $5,000 to $11,000 a year just for the electricity to feed it. So, where does that leave us? Well, lottery mining isn't quite gambling, but it's definitely not investing either. Lots of people have fun doing home Bitcoin lottery mining, in the same way that many people buy lottery tickets. If you're responsible enough to not put yourself into a financial burden, then it can be a fun little hobby. There's always the chance of getting lucky someday. But depending upon your budget and the cost of electricity to your home, you may or may not want to scale that hobby up or down a bit. Hopefully, this video has given you a better idea of the considerations, expenses, and odds involved. I've been Billy for NinjaPirateZombieRobot. I hope this has been informative or at least entertaining to you. And thanks for joining me while we take our inner geek nerds for a little stroll.